There are people in your life who haven't hurt you, but somehow you don't feel like yourself around them anymore. You can't explain it. Nothing obvious is wrong. But after spending time with them, you feel drained, you feel quiet, you feel off. And because there's no clear problem, you convince yourself to stay. You ignore that feeling, you push it down. You tell yourself it will pass, but it doesn't. And the reason this feels so confusing is because we've been taught something our entire lives. We've been taught that love means staying, that loyalty means holding on, that walking away means you didn't care enough. In Buddhist teachings, there is a quiet truth, that suffering doesn't always come from what happens to us, but from what we continue holding on to, even after it no longer feels right. And this is where most people get stuck, not because they don't see the truth, but because they don't know how to let go without guilt, because letting go is often misunderstood. It feels like rejection. It feels like betrayal. It feels like you're doing something wrong. But quiet detachment is not about pushing people away. It is choosing peace without guilt and learn the art of quiet detachment. And maybe the hardest truth to accept is this: not everyone who entered your life is meant to stay in it. 1. Some people quietly drain your peace. There is a difference between something that feels right and something you have simply become used to. And sometimes that difference is so subtle, you don't notice it until your peace is already affected. You begin to realize that it's not always about what people say or do. It's about how your inner world responds in their presence. Not the surface-level interaction, but the quiet shift that happens within you, the way your thoughts change, the way your energy moves, the way your sense of ease slowly fades without a clear reason. At first, it feels small, easy to ignore. You tell yourself, it's nothing. You brush it off as a passing mood, a temporary feeling that doesn't need attention. You continue showing up the same way, continuing conversations, maintaining the connection, because nothing appears wrong enough to question, but something inside you keeps noticing. The way your mind feels slightly more crowded than usual, the way your body carries a subtle tension, even in moments that should feel relaxed. The way your natural openness begins to turn into quiet restraint, not because you choose it, but because it happens on its own. And over time, this becomes familiar. You begin to adjust without realizing it. You soften your reactions, you filter your thoughts, you hold back parts of yourself that once came naturally. Not in a dramatic way, but in small, almost invisible ways that slowly change how you experience yourself. And this is where it becomes difficult to recognize, because there is no conflict, no argument, no clear reason to step away. Everything looks fine from the outside, but peace is not something you measure by appearances. It is something you feel, and when that feeling begins to shift, even slightly, it matters more than anything that can be explained on the surface. In Buddhist understanding, there is a quiet awareness that the mind and body respond before logic can make sense of it. When your inner state feels disturbed, it is not random. It is your awareness responding to something that does not fully align with you anymore. But when you continue to ignore that signal, it does not disappear. It becomes part of your daily experience. You start to feel more tired than usual, not because of what you're doing, but because of what you are carrying. A kind of exhaustion that builds slowly, without a clear source, making everything feel heavier than it should. You may not connect it immediately. You may think it's stress, or routine, or something temporary. But if you look closely, you begin to see a pattern. You feel lighter when you are alone, clearer when there is silence, more like yourself when there is no one asking for your energy. And that contrast is not something to ignore, because not everyone drains you through conflict. Some people drain you quietly, through the energy they take without realizing, through the way you adjust yourself around them, through the subtle disconnection you feel from your own inner state when they are present. And the hardest part is they may not be doing anything wrong. which is why you hesitate. You question yourself instead of questioning the feeling. You stay, not because it feels right, but because leaving feels unjustified. But your peace does not need justification, it only needs awareness. Because the truth is, you don't lose your peace suddenly, you lose it in these quiet moments, in the moments where you ignore what you feel, in the moments where you stay, even when something inside you is asking for space. And the more you stay disconnected from that feeling, the more disconnected you become from yourself. Until, eventually, something within you becomes still enough to notice it clearly, not as confusion, not as doubt, but as a quiet understanding. That not everything in your life is meant to remain close, especially the things that quietly take you away from your own peace. 2. Attachment is fear, not love. Sometimes, what we call love is not as clear as it feels. It carries warmth, familiarity, a sense of connection that feels difficult to replace. It gives you memories, moments, and a certain emotional closeness that becomes part of your everyday life. And because of that, you begin to trust it. You begin to believe that what you feel must be love. But if you slow down and sit with it quietly, without trying to protect it or explain it, something else begins to appear. A subtle tension, a quiet uneasiness that doesn't fully go away, even in calm moments. A feeling that asks for reassurance, that fears distance, that becomes unsettled the moment something begins to change. And this is where the confusion begins. Because attachment often feels like love in the beginning. It feels deep, it feels meaningful, it feels like something worth holding on to. But beneath that feeling, there is often something else guiding it. Not peace, but fear. Fear of losing what feels familiar. Fear of being alone with your own thoughts. Fear of stepping into something unknown, where nothing feels certain anymore. In Buddhist understanding, there is a quiet insight about this. It is said that attachment does not come from love itself, but from the mind's desire to hold, to control, to keep things from changing. And because everything in life is constantly changing, this holding creates tension within us. You may not notice it immediately, but you feel it when you start overthinking small things. When you feel uneasy without reassurance, when your peace depends on whether something stays the same. And still, you hold on, not because it feels right, but because letting go feels harder. You tell yourself that staying is loyalty, that holding on is strength, that walking away means you didn't care enough. But if something requires you to ignore your own inner state, if it asks you to stay even when you feel unsettled, if it creates more confusion than clarity, then it is not coming from love. Love, in its truest form, does not feel like something you have to hold tightly just to keep it from slipping away. It does not demand constant reassurance. It does not make you feel like you are losing yourself just to maintain it. Love allows space. It allows growth. It allows change. It allows you to remain fully yourself without fear of what might happen if things shift. Attachment does the opposite. It tightens when something feels uncertain. It creates urgency. It makes you feel like you must hold on, or you will lose something important. And over time, that holding becomes exhausting, because you are not just holding on to a person, you are holding on to what they represent. The memories, the comfort, the version of your life that included them. And letting go of that does not just feel like losing someone. It feels like losing a part of yourself. That is why attachment feels so strong. But there is another quiet truth within Buddhist philosophy. It reminds us that clinging to what is changing is what creates suffering, not the change itself. The pain does not come from things moving. It comes from trying to stop them from moving. And when you begin to see this clearly, something shifts. Not suddenly, but gently. You start to notice the difference between what feels peaceful and what feels heavy. You begin to recognize where you are staying out of love and where you are staying out of fear. And this awareness does not force you to act immediately. It simply opens your eyes. You no longer feel the need to defend what you are holding on to. You no longer try to convince yourself that something feels right when it doesn't. You just see it as it is. And in that seeing, something begins to loosen, not because you are trying to let go, but because you are no longer holding on in the same way. The tension softens, the need to control fades, the fear begins to lose its grip, and in that quiet space, you begin to understand something deeper. That love was never meant to feel like something you have to protect from change. It was meant to exist freely, and anything that requires fear to keep it close was never truly at peace to begin with. 3. Your energy is sacred. Protect it. Choose where it goes. There comes a point, often very quietly, where you begin to realize that your exhaustion is not coming from what you do, but from where your energy is going. It is not always about long days or heavy responsibilities. Sometimes it is about the invisible exchanges that happen throughout your day, the conversations you engage in, the environments you stay in, the people you give your attention to without noticing how much they take from you. Your energy is not just physical. It is emotional, mental, and deeply personal. It is the way your thoughts move, the way your feelings rise and settle, the way your presence responds to everything around you. And every interaction leaves an imprint on that inner space. Some interactions leave you feeling lighter, calmer, more like yourself. Others leave you feeling restless, scattered, or quietly unsettled, even when nothing obvious has happened. In Buddhist understanding, there is a gentle awareness that everything we experience carries energy, not just actions, but thoughts, emotions, and attention itself. What you give your attention to, you give your life to, even if only in small moments. And when your attention is constantly pulled toward what disturbs your inner balance, your peace slowly begins to fade. The difficulty is that most of us are not taught to notice this. We are taught to be available, to respond quickly, to stay connected, to keep showing up even when something inside us feels off. We give our time freely, our attention constantly, our emotional presence without pause, believing that this is what it means to be kind, to be understanding, to be someone who cares. But over time, this constant giving begins to take something from you. Not suddenly, but gradually. You start to feel tired in a way that rest does not fix. Your thoughts feel heavier than usual. Your patience becomes thinner. Your inner calm becomes harder to reach. And still, you may not immediately understand why this is happening. Because the truth is, not everything that drains you is loud. Not everything that takes from you asks for permission. Some things simply remain in your life, and over time, they occupy more of your inner space than they should. You may notice that certain conversations leave you feeling heavier than before, that some environments make your thoughts more restless, that around certain people you begin to lose the natural ease you feel when you are alone. You may not always have the words to explain it, but you can feel it. And that feeling is not something to ignore. In Buddhist philosophy, there is a quiet reminder that the body and mind speak before the intellect understands. When something disturbs your inner stillness, it is not random, it is awareness. It is your inner state responding to what it is being exposed to. And when this awareness is ignored, the disturbance does not disappear, it deepens. Your energy is sacred because it shapes your entire experience of life. It influences how you move through your day, how you respond to difficulty, how you connect with others, and most importantly, how you connect with yourself. When your energy is scattered, everything feels heavier. When your energy is protected, even difficult moments feel more manageable. But protecting your energy does not mean withdrawing from life. It does not mean becoming distant or closed off. It simply means becoming aware of what you allow into your inner world and choosing, with quiet clarity, what supports your peace and what does not. This awareness begins gently, not by judging, not by reacting, but by noticing. Noticing how you feel before and after certain interactions, noticing where your energy feels expanded and where it feels restricted. Noticing what brings you ease and what quietly takes something from you. And once you begin to notice, something shifts. You no longer give your energy unconsciously. You begin to move with intention. You start choosing where your attention goes, where your time is spent, where your emotional presence is invested. You realize that your energy is not something to give endlessly, but something to share with awareness. In Buddhist teachings, there is a deep emphasis on right awareness, on seeing clearly what nourishes the mind and what disturbs it. This clarity is not about control, but about understanding. And through that understanding, your choices begin to change naturally. You may step back from conversations that feel draining. You may choose silence instead of forcing engagement. You may allow yourself space without needing to explain it. These are small shifts, almost invisible from the outside, but they restore something important within you. Because when you stop giving your energy to what drains you, you begin to reclaim it. Your mind becomes quieter, your emotions begin to settle. Your presence feels more grounded, more aligned with who you truly are. And in that space, you begin to understand something deeply, that your energy was never meant to be available to everyone. It was meant to be honored, protected, and shared with care. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, your time, your emotional depth. Not every connection needs to remain at the same level. This is not selfish. It is awareness. Because when you begin to treat your energy as something valuable, something sacred, your life begins to change in quiet but powerful ways. You stop overextending yourself. You stop staying in spaces that disturb your peace. You stop giving parts of yourself away just to maintain comfort for others. Instead, you begin to choose what feels right. You begin to move with clarity, with intention, with respect for your own inner world. And as you do this, something subtle begins to happen. Life starts to feel lighter, not because everything around you has changed, but because the way you engage with it has. You are no longer absorbing everything. You are no longer reacting to every external influence. You are no longer allowing your inner state to be shaped by what does not belong to you. You become more still, more centered, more aware. And in that awareness, you realize something simple, yet deeply important, that your peace does not depend on everything around you being perfect. It depends on what you allow and what you choose to protect within yourself. Sometimes love looks like stepping back. There is a quiet moment that comes, not suddenly, but gradually, when you begin to realize that staying close is no longer bringing you peace. Nothing dramatic has happened, nothing clearly broken, and yet something feels different. The connection is still there, the presence still exists, but the ease you once felt has slowly faded into something heavier, something more complicated. And in that space, the instinct is often to move closer, to try harder, to fix what feels distant. You tell yourself that if you give a little more, understand a little better, hold on a little tighter, things might return to how they used to be. Because somewhere deep within, you have been taught that love means staying, that love means enduring, that love means never stepping away. But there are moments in life when staying does not heal anything. It only prolongs what is already out of alignment. You may begin to notice that conversations feel forced, that silence feels uncomfortable, that your presence no longer brings the same calm it once did. You may feel yourself becoming more careful, more restrained, as if you are trying to maintain something that no longer moves naturally. And yet, even when you feel this, stepping back feels wrong. It feels like you are giving up, like you are failing in some quiet way. There is a voice inside that questions you, that asks whether you are being selfish, whether you should be more patient, whether you should keep trying just a little longer. But what if stepping back is not a failure? What if it is not rejection, not avoidance, not a lack of love, but a deeper form of it? Because sometimes closeness without harmony creates more pain than distance ever could. When two people remain connected while something inside them is unsettled, that tension does not disappear, it lingers. It shows up in small ways, in the way you speak, in the way you listen, in the way you feel when you are together. You may find yourself overthinking simple interactions, questioning what you say, holding back what you truly feel just to avoid discomfort. And over time, this quiet effort becomes exhausting. Not because you don't care, but because you are trying to sustain something that no longer feels natural. In these moments, distance is not about walking away from someone. It is about creating space for what cannot breathe when held too tightly. It allows emotions to settle, expectations to soften, and clarity to emerge in a way that constant closeness does not allow. Stepping back does not mean you stop caring. It does not mean you erase what was meaningful. It simply means you are no longer forcing something to remain the same when it has already begun to change. There is a certain kind of compassion in this, a quiet understanding that not everything can be fixed by effort alone, that not every connection is meant to stay in the same form forever. And when you recognize this, you begin to see that holding on tightly is not always the kindest thing you can do. Sometimes, holding on creates pressure, it creates expectation, it creates a need for things to be different than they are. And in that pressure, both people begin to feel it, even if it is never spoken out loud. Distance, on the other hand, allows truth to surface gently. It removes the need to constantly manage the connection. It gives both people the space to feel what is real, without interference, without force. This kind of space is not empty. It is quiet, but it is meaningful. It is where understanding begins to form without being pushed. It is where you can hear your own thoughts again, where your emotions begin to settle into something clearer. And sometimes, in that space, you realize that what you were holding on to was not what you thought it was. Or you realize that something has simply run its course, not in a negative way, but in a natural one. There is a certain maturity in allowing this to happen, in not resisting change, in not trying to control what is unfolding. It requires a different kind of strength, one that is not based on endurance, but on awareness. Because it is easier, in many ways, to stay, to keep things as they are, to avoid the discomfort of stepping back, to continue a familiar pattern even when it no longer feels right. But ease is not always truth, and familiarity is not always peace. When you step back with clarity, without anger, without blame, something shifts within you. You are no longer reacting, no longer trying to fix or force. You are simply allowing things to be as they are. And in that allowing, there is a quiet release. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but steady. A sense that you are no longer carrying something that was never fully yours to carry. Sometimes, this distance brings clarity to both sides. Sometimes it allows healing that could not happen in constant closeness. And sometimes it simply reveals what was already there but could not be seen before. But regardless of the outcome, the act of stepping back is not an act of loss. It is an act of honesty. It is a way of honoring what you feel without needing to explain it, without needing to justify it. And when you begin to understand this, something inside you softens. You no longer see distance as something harsh or final. You begin to see it as something necessary, something that protects what is still good while releasing what no longer fits. Because love, in its truest form, does not always hold on. Sometimes it steps back quietly, not to disconnect, but to restore balance. And in that quiet step, There is a kind of peace that cannot be found in forced closeness. Some people are lessons, not forever. There comes a moment, often later than we expect, when we begin to see certain people differently, not because they have changed suddenly, but because something within us has shifted. The way we understand them becomes clearer, and with that clarity comes a quiet realization that not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay in it. At first, this is difficult to accept, because when someone has been part of your life for a long time, when you have shared moments, conversations, memories, it feels natural to assume that they will always remain. We begin to associate time with permanence. We believe that if something has lasted, it is meant to continue. But life does not always move in that way. Some connections are not meant to be lifelong. They are not failures, they are not mistakes, they are simply temporary. They arrive at a certain point in your life, serve a purpose, and then, quietly, their role begins to fade. The difficulty is that we rarely recognize when that moment comes. We hold on to how things used to feel. We remember the ease, the comfort, the way everything once made sense. And we try to preserve that version of the connection, even when the present reality no longer reflects it. You may find yourself revisiting old memories, comparing them to what you feel now, wondering when things changed. But the truth is, change does not always announce itself. It happens gradually, in small shifts that are easy to overlook until they become too clear to ignore. And when you begin to notice that the connection no longer feels the same, that something is missing or unsettled, your instinct is often to hold on tighter, to try to bring it back, to fix what feels distant. Because letting go does not just mean losing a person. It means accepting that the role they once played in your life has come to an end. And that acceptance can feel heavy. But sometimes the value of a connection is not in how long it lasts. It is in what it teaches you while it is present. Some people come into your life to show you something you could not see before. They reveal parts of you that were hidden. They challenge you, support you, reflect things back to you that help you grow. In their presence, you learn, even if you are not aware of it at the time. And once that learning has taken place, something begins to shift. The connection may feel different, less aligned, less natural, not because anything is wrong, but because its purpose has already been fulfilled. The lesson has been given, the growth has happened, and now life is gently moving you forward. But we often resist this. We try to keep the connection alive, not because it still fits, but because it once did. We confuse what was meaningful with what must remain. We tell ourselves that if something mattered, it should last forever. Yet, not everything meaningful is permanent. A teacher does not stay in your life forever once the lesson is complete. A chapter in a book does not continue beyond its place in the story. It exists to move the story forward, not to hold it in place. In the same way, some people are meant to be part of your journey, not your destination. When you begin to see this, something inside you softens. The need to hold on starts to loosen, not because you no longer care, but because you understand that care does not require permanence. You can appreciate what someone brought into your life without needing them to remain in it. You can value the memories without trying to recreate them. You can acknowledge the role they played without forcing it to continue beyond its time. This understanding does not come with bitterness. It does not come with rejection. It comes with a quiet sense of acceptance. You begin to see that life is constantly moving, constantly changing, and that trying to hold everything in place only creates tension within you. When you allow things to move as they naturally do, there is less resistance, less confusion, less inner conflict. You stop asking why something didn't last, and you begin to see what it gave you while it was there. And in that shift, there is a different kind of peace. Not the kind that comes from everything staying the same, but the kind that comes from understanding that not everything is meant to stay. Some people are not meant to walk the entire path with you. They are meant to walk beside you for a while, to shape you, to teach you, to leave something behind that you carry forward. And when their part in your life is complete, they move on, not as a loss, but as a completed chapter. When you begin to see connections in this way, letting go no longer feels like something is being taken from you. It feels like something has already been given. And that quiet shift in perspective changes everything. You no longer hold on out of fear. You no longer try to force what has already changed. You simply allow life to unfold as it is meant to, with a deeper understanding that not every connection is meant to last forever. Some are meant to shape you, and then set you free. 6. You're carrying people you've already outgrown. There is a quiet kind of weight that builds over time, not from what you do, but from what you continue to carry. It doesn't feel heavy at first. It feels familiar. It feels like something you've always known, something that has simply remained part of your life without question. But slowly, almost without noticing, that familiarity begins to feel different. You may start to feel a distance that you can't explain, not a distance created by conflict, but one that comes from within. The way you think has changed. The way you see things has shifted. What once felt natural now feels slightly out of place. And still, you carry it. You continue showing up in the same way. You continue maintaining the same connections, even when something inside you no longer feels aligned with them. Not because you are unaware, but because it feels easier than facing what that awareness might mean. Growth is quiet in that way. It doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't ask for permission. It simply changes you, little by little, until one day you realize that you are not the same person you used to be. Your priorities are different. Your tolerance has shifted. What once felt acceptable no longer sits comfortably within you. And yet, parts of your life remain unchanged. You may find yourself in conversations that no longer interest you, in environments that feel draining rather than nourishing, around people who once felt close but now feel distant in a way that is difficult to describe. Not because they are wrong, and not because you are better, but because you have grown in a direction that no longer aligns with where they are. This is where the weight begins. Because when you continue to carry connections that no longer match your inner state, there is a quiet tension that forms. You start adjusting yourself again. You soften your thoughts, filter your words, hold back parts of who you have become, just to maintain something that once fit you, but no longer does. And over time, this becomes exhausting. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in a slow, steady way that you feel in your mind, in your emotions, in the way your energy begins to fade without a clear reason. You may start to feel disconnected, not only from them, but from yourself. Because every time you ignore what has changed within you, you move slightly further away from your own truth. And still, letting go feels difficult, because these are not strangers. These are people you have history with, memories with, moments that once felt real and meaningful. And walking away from that feels like you are leaving something important behind. But the truth is, you are not carrying the people themselves. You are carrying who you used to be with them. You are carrying the version of your life that once included them in a way that made sense at the time. And letting go of that does not just mean releasing them. It means accepting that you have changed. And that acceptance can feel uncomfortable, because growth does not always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like distance. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it feels like you no longer belong in places that once felt like home. But this is not something to resist. It is something to understand. Because not everything that once fit you is meant to continue fitting you forever. Life moves, people evolve, and sometimes those paths no longer run side by side. When you continue to carry what you have outgrown, you slow yourself down. You create resistance within your own life. You hold on to something that no longer supports who you are becoming, and in doing so, you prevent yourself from fully stepping into that next version of yourself. This does not mean you need to reject anyone. It does not mean you need to create distance with force or with explanation. It simply means recognizing what is true, recognizing that you have grown, recognizing that something has changed, and allowing that change to exist without trying to pull yourself back into a version of life that no longer feels natural. There is a quiet freedom in this, in no longer forcing alignment where it does not exist, in no longer adjusting yourself to maintain something that has already shifted, in allowing your life to reflect who you are now, not who you used to be. And when you begin to do this, something within you begins to feel lighter, not because everything around you has changed, but because you are no longer carrying what no longer belongs to you. Growth, when accepted, creates space. Space for clarity, space for peace, space for connections that feel natural, not forced. And in that space, you begin to move differently, more honestly, more gently, more in alignment with yourself. Because you are no longer holding on to what you have already outgrown, you are allowing yourself to move forward, without the weight of what no longer fits. Stop forcing people to stay in your life. There is a quiet kind of effort that often goes unnoticed, the effort of trying to keep something from changing. It doesn't always look like struggle from the outside. It can look like care, like patience, like commitment, but inside, it feels different. It feels like you are constantly trying to hold something in place that is already beginning to move. You may find yourself thinking about what to say before you say it, choosing your words carefully so nothing feels off. You might adjust your tone, your reactions, even your expectations, just to keep the connection smooth. And over time, this becomes something you do without even realizing it. Because when you sense distance, your instinct is not to step back. It is to move closer, to fix what feels different, to bring things back to how they used to be. But life does not move in reverse. And when something begins to shift, trying to force it to stay the same often creates more tension than ease. You may notice that conversations don't flow the way they once did. That silence feels heavier. That there is a subtle effort required just to maintain what once felt natural. And still, you continue, because letting go feels harder than holding on. There is a fear in that moment, not always obvious, but present. A fear that if you stop trying, the connection will fade completely. A fear that if you step back, it will confirm what you already feel but are not ready to accept. So you keep trying. You reach out more. You explain more. You give more of your time, your attention, your energy, hoping that something will shift back into place. But the more you try to hold on, the more you begin to feel the weight of that effort, because what is meant to stay does not need to be forced. It does not require constant adjustment. It does not ask you to become smaller, quieter, or more careful just to keep it intact. It exists with ease, with a kind of natural flow that does not rely on effort to survive. And when that ease is gone, forcing it back rarely brings it back to life. It only creates a version of the connection that feels maintained rather than real. You may start to feel tired, not because of what is happening, but because of how much you are trying to keep it from changing. That quiet exhaustion builds, not in a dramatic way, but in a steady, persistent way that you carry with you. And in that state, something important begins to fade. Not just the connection, but your sense of ease within it. You may notice that you are no longer fully yourself, that you are responding in ways that feel slightly off, that you are present, but not completely at peace. This is often the moment where clarity begins to surface. Not loudly, not urgently, but gently. You begin to see that holding on is not the same as maintaining something meaningful. That effort alone cannot preserve what has already started to change. That trying harder does not always lead to something becoming stronger. Sometimes it simply prolongs what is already fading, and in that realization there is a quiet invitation not to walk away suddenly, not to force distance, but to stop forcing closeness, to allow things to be as they are, without trying to reshape them into what they used to be. This can feel unfamiliar at first, because you are no longer controlling the outcome. You are no longer trying to fix or manage or sustain. You are simply observing, allowing, stepping back from the need to hold everything together. And in that space, something shifts. The pressure begins to ease. The constant thinking begins to settle. You are no longer carrying the responsibility of keeping something alive on your own. You begin to understand that connections are not meant to be maintained through effort alone. They are meant to exist naturally, to grow or change without being forced into a fixed shape. And when something no longer grows in that way, allowing it to move as it naturally does is not loss. It is alignment. You are not pushing anyone away. You are not rejecting what was once meaningful. You are simply no longer trying to keep something in your life that no longer stays on its own. There is a quiet strength in that. A strength that does not come from holding on, but from letting things be. You stop chasing the same level of connection. You stop expecting things to return to what they once were. You stop adjusting yourself just to keep something from slipping away, and in doing so, you begin to return to yourself. Your energy feels less scattered. Your thoughts feel less crowded. There is a sense of calm that begins to replace the constant effort you were once carrying, because you are no longer forcing what does not naturally remain. And when you allow life to move in this way, you begin to notice something else. What truly belongs in your life does not require this kind of effort. It stays. It flows. It exists without needing to be held together. And everything else, no matter how meaningful it once was, finds its own way of moving on. Not as something lost, but as something that has completed its place in your life. And when you stop forcing people to stay, you are not losing them. You are simply allowing your life to reflect what is real, instead of what you were trying to keep. 8. Letting go creates space for what truly aligns. There is a quiet fullness that builds inside a life where nothing has been released for a long time. On the surface, it can look complete, even abundant. There are people, routines, memories, familiar patterns that have been there for years. Everything seems occupied. Everything seems in place, and yet, somewhere within that fullness, there is a sense of heaviness that does not quite leave. It is not always easy to recognize at first, because we often associate having more with feeling better, more connections, more involvement, more emotional ties. It gives the impression that life is rich, that nothing is missing. But what we rarely notice is how much of that fullness is made up of things that no longer truly belong to who we are becoming. You may start to feel this in subtle ways. A quiet resistance when you think about certain people or situations. A sense of fatigue that appears without a clear reason. A feeling that your inner world is crowded, not with chaos, but with things that no longer feel aligned. And still, you hold on. Not because everything feels right, but because letting go feels uncertain. There is a hesitation that comes with release, a question that lingers in the mind. What happens if I let this go? What will be left? Will there be emptiness where something once existed? So, instead of creating space, you continue to fill it. You stay connected. You maintain what has always been there. You keep things as they are, even when something inside you is quietly asking for change. But life does not move through accumulation alone. It also moves through release. Without letting go, there is no room for anything new to enter. Not just new people or opportunities, but new clarity, new peace, a different way of experiencing your own life. Because when your inner space is filled with what you have outgrown, there is very little room for what is meant to come next. Letting go is often misunderstood. It is seen as loss, as something being taken away. But in many ways, it is the opposite. It is the act of removing what is no longer needed, so that something more aligned can naturally take its place. It does not require force. It does not require sudden decisions or dramatic endings. It begins with awareness, with noticing what feels heavy, what feels forced, what feels like it is being held in place rather than flowing naturally. And when you begin to see that clearly, something softens. You start to understand that holding on is not always an act of strength. Sometimes it is simply resistance to change. A quiet attempt to keep things the same, even when they are already shifting. There is a certain discomfort in letting go, especially at the beginning. Because when something leaves your life, even if it no longer felt right, it creates space. And that space can feel unfamiliar. It can feel quiet, open, even empty. But that emptiness is not something to fear. It is not a void. It is potential. It is the absence of what was misaligned, making room for what is more in tune with who you are now. It is the space where your thoughts can settle, where your energy can return to you, where your life can begin to feel lighter. At first, you may feel the absence more than the benefit. You may notice the silence where there was once constant interaction. You may feel the lack of something that had become routine, even if it was no longer nourishing. But slowly, that silence begins to change. It becomes calm instead of empty. It becomes peaceful instead of unfamiliar. It becomes a space where you can finally hear yourself again. And in that space, something new begins to form, not because you are searching for it, but because there is now room for it to appear. Your energy is no longer tied to what was draining you. Your attention is no longer occupied by what no longer fits. You begin to notice what feels right more easily, what brings you ease instead of effort, what aligns with your current state rather than your past. This is not something that needs to be chased. It happens naturally when there is space, because what truly aligns with you does not need to force its way into your life. It arrives quietly, fits easily, and does not require you to become someone else to maintain it. But this can only happen when you are willing to release what is already taking up that space. And that release does not mean forgetting or rejecting what once mattered. It means recognizing that its place in your life has changed, that what once fit you may no longer do so, and allowing that truth to exist without trying to resist it. When you begin to let go in this way, gently, without pressure, without urgency, something within you begins to feel lighter, not because everything is suddenly perfect, but because you are no longer carrying what you do not need to carry. Your life begins to open, not outwardly at first, but inwardly. Your thoughts become clearer, your emotions feel less tangled, your sense of self becomes more present, and in that quiet openness, you begin to experience something different. A life that is not crowded, but aligned. A life where what remains feels natural, not forced. And a life where what enters next does not have to fight for space, because you have finally made room for it. You're not losing them, you're finding yourself. There is a moment that feels like loss, but if you stay with it long enough, you begin to realize it is something else entirely. At first, it feels like something is slipping away from you, a connection, a presence, a version of your life that once felt familiar, and your instinct is to hold on, to try to keep it from fading, to convince yourself that if you just try a little more, things will return to how they used to be. But beneath that feeling of loss, something quieter is happening. You are beginning to return to yourself. It doesn't feel like that in the beginning. It feels uncomfortable. It feels uncertain. There is a kind of emptiness that appears when something leaves, even if that something was no longer right for you. You notice the silence where there was once conversation. You feel the absence where there was once routine. And in that space, your mind starts to question everything. You wonder if you made the right choice. You wonder if you should have stayed longer. You wonder if you have lost something important. But what you are really feeling is not just the absence of them. It is the unfamiliar presence of yourself. Because for a long time, your attention was focused outward. Your energy was invested in maintaining something, understanding someone, holding on to a connection that had become part of your identity. And when that connection begins to fade, all of that energy has nowhere to go but back to you. And that can feel overwhelming at first. You begin to notice your own thoughts more clearly. Your own emotions become more visible. The parts of yourself that were once quiet, because your attention was elsewhere, begin to surface. This is not loss. This is awareness. You are no longer distracted by what you were trying to maintain. You are no longer adjusting yourself to fit into something that no longer aligned. You are simply with yourself again, without interference, without constant external focus. And in that space, you begin to see things differently. You start to notice how much of yourself you had set aside, the thoughts you didn't express, the feelings you ignored, the parts of your personality that became quieter just to keep things smooth. You realize that you were not just holding on to them, you were holding on to a version of yourself that existed within that connection. And now that it is no longer there, you are faced with who you are without it. This can feel like uncertainty, because you are no longer defined by that dynamic. You are no longer responding to the same patterns. You are not playing the same role. You are simply you. And at first, that can feel unfamiliar. But slowly, something begins to change. You start to feel lighter in ways you didn't expect. Your mind becomes clearer. Your energy feels less scattered. You are no longer carrying the constant effort of maintaining something that required so much of you. You begin to reconnect with what feels natural. Simple things begin to feel different. Your thoughts flow more freely. Your emotions feel less restricted. You start to notice what brings you peace, not because someone else is part of it, but because it aligns with you. This is where the shift happens. You stop seeing it as losing them. You begin to see it as finding yourself. Because what you thought was loss was actually the removal of something that was no longer allowing you to fully be who you are. And in that removal, there is space. Space to think without influence, space to feel without restraint, space to exist without adjusting. You are no longer dividing your attention between yourself and something that no longer fits. You are no longer compromising your inner world just to keep something from changing. You are simply present with yourself. And in that presence, something important returns. Clarity. You begin to understand what you truly want, what feels right, what no longer belongs in your life. Not based on habit, not based on fear, but based on a deeper awareness of yourself. This is not something you could have seen clearly before. Because when you are holding on to something, your perspective is shaped by it. Your decisions are influenced by it. Your sense of self is tied to it. But when that attachment is no longer there, you see things differently, more honestly, more calmly, more clearly. And this clarity brings a different kind of peace. Not the kind that comes from everything staying the same, but the kind that comes from being aligned with yourself. You no longer feel the need to go back, to fix, to recreate what once was. You understand that what you have now is something you didn't have before, a deeper connection with yourself, a stronger sense of who you are, a quiet confidence that does not depend on anyone else being present. And from that place, you begin to move differently. You make choices that reflect your truth, not your fears. You engage in connections that feel natural, not forced. You no longer hold on to things just because they once mattered. You allow your life to reflect who you are now. And that is where the real transformation begins. because you realize that nothing was taken from you. You were simply being guided back to yourself. And what once felt like loss was actually the beginning of something much more real, a life that is not built around holding on, but around being fully present with who you are becoming. Solitude is not loneliness. There is a kind of silence that many people are afraid of, not because it is harmful, but because it is unfamiliar. When the noise fades, when the conversations slow down, when there is no one immediately around to fill the space, something inside begins to feel exposed. And in that exposure, the mind often labels it as loneliness. But solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is the feeling of being disconnected, even when you are surrounded by people. It is the sense that no one truly sees you, no one fully understands you, and that something within you remains unheard. It is heavy, restless, and often filled with a quiet longing for something to fill the emptiness. Solitude, on the other hand, is different. It is not about the absence of others, but the presence of yourself. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. When you are used to constant interaction, constant noise, constant distraction, being alone with your own thoughts can feel overwhelming. Old memories may surface, unfinished emotions may rise. The mind may try to escape, to reach for something, anything, to avoid sitting in that stillness. And this is where many people turn away from solitude. They fill the silence quickly. They reach for distractions. They keep themselves occupied, not because they need to, but because being alone feels too unfamiliar, too quiet, too revealing. But if you stay with it, if you allow that silence to exist without trying to escape it, something begins to shift. The discomfort softens. The noise in your mind starts to settle. What once felt empty begins to feel spacious. You begin to notice your thoughts more clearly, not in a chaotic way, but in a calm, steady way. You start to understand what you feel, not through reaction, but through observation. There is no pressure to respond, no need to explain, no expectation to be anything other than what you are in that moment. And, slowly, solitude becomes something else. It becomes a place where you can rest without performing, a place where you do not have to adjust yourself to fit into someone else's expectations, a place where your energy is not being pulled in different directions. You begin to feel a quiet sense of ease, not because everything is perfect, but because nothing is demanding your attention in that moment. Your presence is fully your own. This is where healing begins, not in noise, not in constant activity, but in stillness, in the space where you can finally listen to yourself without interruption, where you can notice what you have been carrying, what you have been ignoring, what you truly need. Solitude allows you to reconnect with the parts of yourself that were lost in the noise, the parts that were quiet because your attention was always elsewhere, the parts that were waiting for space, for stillness, for a moment where they could be seen without distraction. And as you spend more time in that space, something important begins to grow. Self-trust. You begin to rely less on external validation. You stop needing constant reassurance. You become more comfortable with your own thoughts, your own decisions, your own presence. You realize that being alone does not mean being incomplete. It means being whole on your own. This does not mean you stop valuing connection. It does not mean you withdraw from others or become distant. It simply means that your sense of peace no longer depends on constant interaction. You no longer seek connection out of fear of being alone. You choose connection from a place of clarity. And that changes everything, because when you are at ease with yourself, you are no longer trying to fill a void. You are no longer holding on to people just to avoid silence. You are not afraid of space, because you understand what that space gives you. It gives you clarity. It gives you balance. It gives you a sense of grounding that cannot be taken away by who comes or goes in your life. And in that understanding, solitude is no longer something to escape. It becomes something to return to. A quiet place within yourself where you can always find calm, no matter what is happening around you. A place where you are not missing anything, you are simply present. And in that presence, you begin to realize that what once felt like loneliness was never about being alone. It was about being disconnected from yourself. And now, in this stillness, you are no longer disconnected. You are home. 11. Let go without anger. You win silently. There is a moment, after everything has already shifted, when you realize that letting go is not the hardest part. The hardest part is how you let go, because even when you step away physically, something inside can still remain tightly held. The memories, the conversations, the things you wish had been different, they continue to move through your mind, replaying quietly, keeping the connection alive long after it has ended. And this is where many people remain stuck, not in the situation itself, but in the emotional weight of it. Anger feels natural in these moments. It feels justified. When something has hurt you, when you feel misunderstood or unappreciated, anger rises almost automatically. It gives a sense of control, a sense of strength, as if holding on to it protects you from feeling something deeper. But anger has a quiet cost. It keeps your attention tied to what has already passed. It keeps your energy connected to something you have already stepped away from. It may feel like you have moved on, but internally you are still holding a part of it with you. And that weight does not disappear on its own. It lingers in your thoughts. It shapes how you see future situations. It creates a subtle tension within you that follows you, even into moments that should feel calm. Letting go without anger is not about denying what you felt. It is not about pretending that nothing affected you. It is about choosing not to carry it forward. Because the moment you release something with anger, you are still holding on to it in a different form. You are still connected to it, just through resistance instead of attachment. And resistance keeps it alive. You may find yourself replaying conversations, thinking about what you should have said, what the other person should have done differently. You may feel the need for closure, for an explanation, for something that makes everything make sense. But not everything in life will come with clear answers. Not every ending will give you the understanding you hoped for. And waiting for that understanding can keep you in the same place for longer than necessary. There is a different way to let go, a quieter way. It does not require confrontation. It does not require final words or dramatic closure. It simply requires a shift within you, a shift from needing things to be different to accepting them as they are. This acceptance is not agreement. It is not approval. It is simply a recognition of reality. You see what happened. You feel what you felt. And instead of holding on to it with tension, you allow it to exist without resistance. At first, this may feel unfamiliar. The mind may try to return to anger because it feels more active, more powerful. But true strength is not found in holding on to something, it is found in releasing it. When you begin to let go without anger, something within you becomes lighter. Not instantly, not completely, but gradually. The thoughts begin to settle, the emotional intensity begins to fade. The need to revisit the past becomes less frequent. You are no longer carrying the same weight. And in that lightness, you begin to notice a change in how you move through your life. You are less reactive. You are less affected by what others say or do. You are no longer looking for validation or closure from situations that have already ended. You become quieter, not in a withdrawn way, but in a steady way. A way that feels grounded. Because you are no longer holding on to something that no longer belongs in your present. This is what it means to win silently. Not by proving anything to anyone, not by showing that you were right or that they were wrong, but by returning to a state where your peace is not dependent on the past. You do not need to explain your decision. You do not need to justify your feelings. You do not need anyone else to understand what you went through. Your clarity is enough. Your decision to release, without bitterness, without resentment, is enough. And in that quiet release, there is a kind of freedom that cannot be achieved through anger, because anger keeps you connected. Peace sets you free. You begin to see that holding on to resentment only keeps you in a place you have already left. And by letting go gently, without force, without resistance, you allow yourself to move forward fully, not partially, not with something still attached, but completely. And this changes how you experience everything that comes next. You are no longer carrying past emotions into new situations. You are no longer reacting from old wounds. You are simply present, with a clearer mind and a lighter heart. There is no need to prove that you have moved on. It shows in your stillness. It shows in your calm. It shows in the way you no longer return to what you have already released. And in that quiet state, you understand something deeply. That real strength is not loud. It does not need recognition. It exists in the way you choose peace, even when holding on to anger would feel easier. And in choosing that peace, you do not lose anything. You gain yourself back, fully, without the weight of what you no longer need to carry. Inner stillness makes you untouchable. There is a kind of strength that does not come from control, and it does not come from changing the world around you. It comes from something much quieter, something that begins to grow within you when you stop reacting to everything that happens outside of you. Most of what we feel is not created in the moment itself, but in what follows after. A word is spoken, a situation unfolds, something does not go the way we expected, and the event passes quickly, but the mind holds onto it. It replays it, questions it, resists it, and in doing so, it gives that moment more power than it ever had on its own. This is where restlessness begins. Not in the situation, but in the reaction. When the mind is constantly responding, constantly analyzing, constantly trying to control or fix what has already happened, it never finds rest. It moves from one thought to another, one emotion to another, without pause. And in that movement, your peace becomes fragile, easily disturbed by anything that does not go as planned. But there is another way of being, a quieter way. It does not come from suppressing what you feel, and it does not come from pretending that nothing affects you. It comes from learning to remain still, even when something within you wants to react. Inner stillness is not the absence of emotion. It is the space where emotion can exist without taking control. When something happens, you feel it, you notice it, but you do not immediately follow it. You do not let it carry you into a chain of thoughts and reactions that take you away from yourself. Instead, you remain present. You allow the feeling to rise, to exist, and to pass. And in doing so, you begin to see something clearly, that not everything requires a response, not everything needs to be held onto, not everything deserves your energy. At first, this can feel unfamiliar. You may be used to reacting quickly, to defending, explaining, or trying to fix what feels uncomfortable. There may be an urge to respond, to engage, to prove something, to make sense of everything immediately. But when you pause, when you allow a moment of stillness before reacting, something shifts. The intensity softens, the urgency fades, the situation begins to look different, because you are no longer viewing it through a restless mind. You are seeing it from a place of clarity, and from that clarity, your response, if there is one, comes from understanding rather than impulse. This is where your power begins to change. Not in controlling others, not in controlling situations, but in no longer being controlled by them. When your inner state is steady, external things lose their ability to disturb you in the same way. Words that once would have affected you deeply begin to pass more easily. Situations that once created anxiety begin to feel manageable, not because life has become easier, but because you have become more grounded. Inner stillness creates a space within you that is not easily shaken. It is not something you force, it is something you allow. You allow yourself to step back from constant reaction. You allow your mind to settle instead of feeding every thought. You allow yourself to exist in the present moment without being pulled into past regrets or future worries. And slowly, this becomes your natural state. You begin to notice that you are no longer as affected by small disturbances. You are no longer pulled into every emotional shift around you. There is a sense of distance, not from life, but from the unnecessary noise within it. This distance is not disconnection, it is awareness. You are still present, you still feel, you still care, but you are no longer overwhelmed. You are no longer losing yourself in every situation that arises. And this is what makes you untouchable. Not in the sense that nothing ever affects you, but in the sense that nothing has the same power over you as it once did. You are not easily shaken. You are not easily pulled into reaction. You are not easily disturbed. There is a steadiness within you that remains, even when things around you are uncertain. And this steadiness changes how you move through life. You listen more. You react less. You observe before you respond. You no longer feel the need to engage in everything. You no longer feel the need to prove, to defend, or to control, because your sense of self is no longer dependent on what is happening outside of you. It is rooted within. And from that place, life begins to feel different. Not perfect, not without challenges, but lighter, more manageable, more peaceful, because you are no longer fighting every moment. You are allowing things to be as they are, while remaining steady within yourself. This is not something that happens instantly. It develops over time, through awareness, through practice, through choosing stillness again and again, even when reaction feels easier. And as it deepens, you begin to realize something profound. That peace was never something you had to search for outside of you. It was something that becomes visible when the mind becomes still. And when that stillness is present, nothing outside you has the same power it once did. You are no longer controlled by circumstances, by opinions, by outcomes. You are simply present, grounded, and aware. And in that state, there is a quiet strength that does not need to be seen, does not need to be proven. It simply exists, steady, unshaken, untouchable. And now, after everything you have reflected on, there is nothing more you need to add, only something to release. Because the truth is, peace was never something missing from your life. It was something quietly waiting, beneath everything you were holding on to, waiting beneath the need to keep certain people close, waiting beneath the fear of letting go, waiting beneath the noise of trying to fix, explain, and control. And as you've seen, not everything that stays in your life is meant to stay forever. Not every connection is meant to be carried. Not every feeling is meant to be held onto. Some things were meant to teach you, and then leave. Some were meant to shape you, and then change. And your only role was never to hold everything together. It was to notice what feels true, and gently allow the rest to fall away. You don't need to force distance. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to explain your peace. You simply begin to choose differently. You choose where your energy goes. You choose what you hold on to. You choose when to step back, when to stay, and when to let go. Quietly. And in these quiet choices, something begins to return to you. A sense of clarity, a sense of balance, a sense of yourself. Life becomes lighter, not because everything around you has changed, but because you are no longer carrying what does not belong to you. You are no longer forcing what does not flow. You are no longer holding on to what disturbs your inner stillness. And in that space, something settles, a calm that does not depend on others, a strength that does not need to be seen, a peace that does not need to be earned. So you don't need to rush anything from here. Just move gently, Let life come and go. Let people arrive and leave. And most importantly, stay with yourself. Because in the end, nothing you release takes anything real away from you. It only makes space for what was always meant to remain.